being the costume designer of Star Trek Discovery Season 5 has been great. It's been a little bit of a roller coaster. There's always a lot going on. Every episode they go somewhere new, and so getting to kind of create new worlds in Trek is always exciting. So talking about Kamau, our first episode, it's inspired by Tuareg and desert kind of Bedouin tribes, but also looking at the hill tribes that are kind of in the remote parts of Asia, being inspired by their textiles that are usually hand-worked and embroidered, but knowing that this was future forward, doing that with printing instead. So the fabric started off as one color. We then pulled some of the color out, dyed in a darker color so it feels very, very modeled and aged, and actually then screen printed on top of that a darker color just to give it a lot of depth. Our textile artists actually went in and painted sand in to everything. The concept of these, knowing that they were gonna have their hoods up a lot and that there might be something kind of dragging, was an interesting thing that I pitched to them early on. We tried to use things that were as light as possible, because practically speaking, in the desert, you'd want fabrics that were lighter, but also fabrics that would pick up wind as they were on these sand runners.
Welcome. Kalzara is eager to meet you.
So in episode 3, we go to planet Trill again and we meet Kalzara. The idea of this kind of timeless being that's been around forever and what that looks like in relationship to the Trill that we've seen before. So we used kind of the same raw silk, but we aged it. It's all natural raw silk that once washed kind of starts to pill. So we purposely went back in and kind of scuffed into that. All this beading is hand sewn on and applied, and it's all kind of meant to be kind of organic and sinewy, nothing that's feeling too regular or too much of a pattern, but we put it all as kind of texture and inside the seams. And it all was meant to kind of echo her hair and the makeup and all that and kind of make it feel like she was kind of this kind of ghostly being. And if you look closely, those are all meant to be Trill spots that we kind of drop shadow painted in. So looking at episode 506, we're in Halemno, and the concept of Halemno was that there is no status. And so the idea came about then to kind of put everyone in shades of brown. So knowing that it was a pre-war planet and being inspired by the Bronze Age and cavemen and all that, all the fabrics we tried to use were natural fibers, so it's a lot of cottons, linen, silks. So in terms of some of the dye techniques we're using, there is shibori. So we basically first hand sew it, block off some areas, dye it, and then pull the threads out, and that's how some of these resist areas kind of remain, which we use both on Tilly and on Burnham. All of these are basically hand braided like you would braid hair. So this is 4 out of probably about 60 or 70 costumes that we built.
I loved the costumes for Halemno. I thought they were so cool. Anthony is so lovely. He's just really creative, and I love to see where he gets his inspiration from.
You look beautiful.
When Michelle told me that the Breen were kind of our main villains, I knew what those costumes were. And so a little bit of trepidation in terms of how do you invent something that is so specific in its style lines. And I think that helmet also being so specific, and I think something that the fans know very, very well. I sat with it probably for a good 2 months before we touched it, trying to just kind of figure out how we were going to make things feel sleeker and cleaner for a costume that was so bulky in its original inception. The general silhouette of the costume we preserved, which was kind of this diagonal foam kind of costume. This wide bandolier we also preserved with all of the textures. We just kind of updated things to make them different. First, the concept came about that the Breen needed refrigeration suits, and that was kind of the basis of what that costume was. So that kind of became the root inspiration for the base suit that all of our Breen have, and this kind of mesh woven detail where tubes run through, and the tubing that kind of runs through all of that kind of continues that refrigeration, that kind of cooling technology. And then in terms of the vest itself, it's all made out of neoprene and foam and stacked, and all of our fabric and stuff is pleather that has then been painted over to kind of look like it's been oxidized, and then it's screen printed on top, and that's all raised and hand foiled. All of these shoulders are movable. They're magneted, so they return back to their place, but they all flex. So we tried to be as stunt friendly as possible. The medic comes about later, and the idea was kind of inspired by like an Undertaker, creepy doctor kind of vibe. It's the same Breen neck that we've kind of chromed and painted jet black. And then this is a leather that we also kind of painted super slick. If there was splatter or residue or blood, practically they could wipe off very easily, but it also just felt a little bit kind of creepy and stood away from the rest of the costume. The Primarch's color is gold. So we foil on top of the regular Breen fabric of gold, and then also used gold trim, but kind of aged it down so it wasn't too shiny. We made him this cape. This is all leather that has been printed on top of and raised in the same kind of Breen grid. And then we gave him a much stronger shoulder that's inspired by medieval knights, and they're actually for movement and stunt. It's all on a hinge.
Grandma, don't. How dare you!
Is it vain to say that I really liked my own costume? I put that outfit on, and all of a sudden, no one can mess with me.
Monlock, who in the script were described as kind of a futuristic Bonnie and Clyde. And so referencing kind of biker gangs as kind of the root inspiration. The idea is they're both couriers and they're probably jet setting around space and meeting different people and getting into trouble. And so all their costumes and things we really broke down. And so we started with this kind of harness that we made. That started off brand new. We started breaking into it. The same thing with the shirt that we printed on top of, the gloves and all that. So it felt that they'd really kind of been in it. Locke, knowing that he was a Breen from the beginning and trying to nod to that. We look at the tubing that we also used in our Breen as kind of the idea of this kind of coolant refrigeration thing. All of his seams are all kind of diagonal, which again was meant to kind of give a subtle nod to the Breen, as was this kind of grid texture. And then the leather jacket itself is all kind of stacked to feel kind of like plates, moving plates.
Hello and welcome. I'm Hyrel, one of the sworn order who tend to the Eternal Gallery and Archive.
So talking about our archivist look, the overall look is inspired partially by like 1960s Balenciaga trapeze meets kind of graduation gown. So there's almost 20 yards of raw silk that's in each of these costumes, so they're oddly kind of heavy. All of this fabric we had custom pleated, like almost 200 yards of fabric that was all custom pleated. And then these shoulders that are all leather that's molded. All of these are laser cut shapes glued on top of the silk, and all of that then goes through a heat press and presses it flat. So all of it pushes forward and kind of creates this quilting without stitching, that kind of future forward quilting. And then our textile artists went in and they airbrushed in to kind of pull out all the dimension of all of our shapes.
How fun to have a book visit me in the library for a change.
So in previous seasons, Books had this kind of hero coat that he gives to Burnham at the end of season 4. So when he comes back to season 5, we were tasked with creating a new coat for him. So this coat is all leather that started off brown, but they've since painted almost like layers and layers of color in it and aged it down to make it feel like he's really, really worn it and he's been around. And if we turn it around, actually, it has all these kind of back plates. So this is all quilted leather. Cordie goes inside it. They sew it all down and then they pull the cords out.
May I present the newlyweds?
The wedding scene, please. The outfits for both Tarina and Saru are breathtaking.
I think 6 new costume pieces were custom made for me over the course of this season alone. And then the wedding dress is just like insane.
I got to kind of have a sneak peek at the wedding dress, and I was completely floored. It's a huge testament to our entire costume team.
So when we finally came to the wedding, I kind of just looked and saw what Vulcan weddings had existed in canon. So on the original series, T'Pring had a silver wedding dress and it had these very specific kind of lines down the front. And so that kind of became the root inspiration for Trina. It's the Vulcan shoulder that, we've been doing on the show in a very streamlined kind of dress. And we kept those lines, but we laser cut leather. Then that's all hand applied, sewn and glued onto this dress. Then on top of it, there was this hood and skirt combination. All of that got attached to the base dress, which has an understructure under it to make sure it could support the entire thing.
I think it's a team of 7 to create this exquisite piece that's going to be worn for one scene.
Saru's wedding costume, we took the idea of the silhouettes of the Kelpians, which is kind of frock coat inspired, and we tried to kind of Vulcanize it a little bit as though it was a union of cultures, so he has a much stronger shoulder.
To be able to play Saru in such a fabulous looking outfit is it's a real treat, and I owe that to Anthony.